Recording?
Recording.
Tov. So yesterday we started talking about magic. We spoke about the Chartumei Mitzrayim. Saw the two different ways the Rishonim understand what exactly was it which these Chartumim, these sorcerers of Egypt, what did they do? Did they actually replicate those plagues that which they were able to using some form of sorcery, or was it just some form of illusion, some form of trickery? But they couldn't actually do it. That's the machloket between the Rambam on the one hand and many of the other Rishonim, Ramban, Rashba, Ran, and others on the other. So that's in terms of the commentary, in terms of the explanation of the narrative and of the story. Now, when it gets to the halachic discussion, in terms of, we know that there are a number of isurim, a number of prohibitions regarding magic, sorcery, etc. The Rambam lists no less than 11 different things to do with mechashef and meonen and different words, different forms of magic which are used. And again, according to the Rambam, and he writes in very strong language, that if one says that all these things are real, they have some they're grounded in reality, they're just things which the Torah is telling us to keep away from, not to be involved in. According to the Rambam, says that's a foolish way to look at it. That's not what it means. What it means is none of these things are real. You should stay away from them. That's the prohibition. So the prohibition, according to the Rambam, of one who engages in magic is one who pretends to engage in magic, who makes as if he is. Maybe he believes that he's involved in these things, but they don't actually exist. And of course, the practical question comes down to a question for us is in terms of magic shows, illusions, etc. Would that fall under this prohibition or not? So one of the two of the prohibitions that we find, one is called is about a mechashef, which is a magician, a sorcerer, whatever it is. Another one is a meonen. The Torah tells us that leonen is going to be forbidden. Different interpretations what that means, but one of them is, the Gemara says, comes from the word onen, comes from the word ayin. It's related to trickery, deception of the eyes, what's called achizat einayim. In fact, the Gemara says that when it comes to Hilchot magic are like Hilchot Shabbat. In the sense that we can divide it into three categories. In the same way that by Hilchot Shabbat you have things for which one is chayav, which one is biblically liable for punishment. Then there is a category where one is patur aval asur, not liable for punishment, certainly midoraita, but it's still forbidden, midrabanan, and there are things which are mutar completely. So too, says the Gemara, when it comes to kshafim, when it comes to magic, there is a type of magic which is forbidden, which one is chayav skila. What is that? That is where one actually performs an action, where one performs something, and that one would be chayav skila. Then there is a case where one is patur aval asur. What is that? Says the Gemara, that is achizat einayim. That is deception of the eyes, where you make it look like you did something, you didn't actually do anything. Rashi understands maybe it's a form of hypnosis or something like that. It makes it appear that one did this magic, but one did not. Again, our question is going to be, does a modern day magic show fit into this category of achizat einayim? You might be surprised at some of the answers. And then what is the magic which is mutar? Again, this is not practically relevant. Nobody can do this today. But it talks about some of the Tanaim who would use a Sefer Yetzirah, and through Kabbalistic methods, they would perform all sorts of magic, create calves which they would eat, etc. And that is going to be permitted. But what concerns us is achizat einayim. So now the question is like this: the Rambam writes about this. He writes according to the Gemara, he said achizat einayim, deception of the eyes, seems to be patur, but not patur aval asur. In other words, it's going to be forbidden, maybe midoraita, maybe midrabanan, but one is not going to get malkut for it. One's not going to get be chayav from the Torah. Where this gets confusing is that the Rambam seems to contradict himself. He writes two separate halachot. Maybe one read them inside, but he writes the concept of achizat einayim, of trickery of the eyes. He writes it in two different places in the same parah. And in one place he says that achizat einayim, he says, in both places, he says, this is all nonsense. This is all made up. This is also, there's not real trickery going on. I was very consistent about that. But he says in one place that one would get malkut for it. And in another place, he says that one would not get malkut for it. He says, be makat mardut, which is midrabanan. It seems to be a contradiction in terms in the Rambam. So there are a number of different, much ink has been spilled on this, different ways to understand why the contradiction in the Rambam. Why in one place he says, Ochez Ta'inayim, deception of the eyes, is going to be forbidden on a Torah level. On another place he says, seems to be forbidden on a rabbinic level or without. So one of the answers that's given, and this is the answer of the Bach, and it's very, very strange, and the truth is, to this day, I don't understand the resolution to this contradiction in the Rambam. I don't understand this Bach, but I'll tell you what he says, and then we'll see how it plays out to practical terms. He says the Rambam's talking about two different things. He says where he talks about a kishuf, where he talks about magic and sorcery, there he's talking about where a person performed an action and a person actually did something, and therefore, in that case, one would be chayav malkot, one would be liable. But later on, when he talks about ochez ta'inayim, he's talking about where one did not perform an action, one just made it seem like he did something which he didn't actually do, and therefore there's not going to be malkot. Now, why that's difficult, why that doesn't make sense to me, is because according to the Rambam, whatever you're doing, you aren't actually doing anything. The kishuf doesn't exist. It's not a real thing. So whatever you're doing is a form of achizat einayim. You're pretending that you're making it look as if something's happening, but you're not actually doing anything. So I don't have a good answer for you how to resolve the contradiction in the Rambam. But what comes out of this, and he writes it very explicitly, he writes it in Sefer HaMitzvot as well. It's interesting, in Sefer HaMitzvot, where he gives the introduction to this, the word that the Rambam uses is chartumin. He doesn't, like we said yesterday, he doesn't have a perush on the Chumash, but when he's talking about magic shows, very, very clear. He says if a person comes along and does all sorts of sleight of hand, you throw a ring up into the sky, you make it disappear, and it appears from your nose, or you take a snake. He gives us description of a magic show. He calls it po'al ha'chartumin, right, the same word, but he says that is completely forbidden. That is the Rambam. And the Radbaz says, all of this makes sense. It's what we said yesterday. If, according to the Rambam, kishuf is not real, and there is no magical force, and you can't do it in the first place. So when the Torah says it's forbidden, when the Torah says you cannot be involved in achizat einayim, it's deception of the eyes, obviously it's talking about trickery, because that's all that there can be. That's according to the Rambam. The Radbaz says, but if we go according to the other opinion, we go according to the other Rishonim who say that this is real, and therefore when the Torah prohibits it, it prohibits you from being engaged in this type of magic, which is real magic. But if you're just doing an illusion, you're just doing sleight of hand, that's not what the Torah is talking about. That would be mutar. So it comes out quite paradoxical. According to the Rambam, who does not believe in magic, doing magic shows is going to be completely forbidden. According to the others who say that it does exist, then the magic show, again, on the condition that it's clear to everybody that what I'm doing is a trick, what I'm doing is sleight of hand. There are magicians today who have these shows or have these routines. Sometimes you have mentalists or people who go out there and say, they have supernatural powers or things like that. That, according to everybody, is going to be completely forbidden. But based on this, in terms of just the sleight of hand, where people know that it's a trick, so the Rambam says you can't do it. The Chokhmat Adam is the one who copies, he basically quotes the Rambam's language more or less verbatim, and he is very, very stringent on this as well, and he says that it's forbidden. Going into contemporary poskim, there are some who are still very, very stringent on this. Rav Ovadia Yosef, Shevet Halevi as well, Rav Wosner, both of them write in very, very strong terms. All magic shows, all types of illusion, sleight of hand, etc., completely forbidden. Rav Ovadia has a tshuva. He says, even if it's for l'samech chatan v'kala, or even if it's for Purim, he says, forget about it. You cannot do. It is forbidden. That is one side. There are others, though, and I think this is probably a more majority view, like many of the contemporary poskim, and this is what many shuls and religious groups and organizations and parties, etc., who do have magicians would rely on this. The Divrei Yetziv, the Kloisenberger Rebbe. So he writes as well. He wants to say, he says there might even be a way, according to the Rambam. I won't get into that, but certainly according to everybody else, and based on Shulchan Aruch, says the Kloisenberger Rebbe, if the achizat einayim that is forbidden is in a case where a person is at least pretending, claiming that they have magical powers. But if it's just a magic show, illusion, everybody knows it's an illusion. Everybody knows it's sleight of hand. Doesn't mean you have to know how it's done. Otherwise, there's no point in the magic show, right? But if you know that it is, that's part of the entertainment. So he says that it's permitted. Chaim David Halevi also would permitted it. Rav Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva where he's a little bit hesitant because there are many other poskim who were stringent. But he says at the end of the day, he says he thinks there's room to be lenient. And I think this is probably what most poskim and most organizations would who do condone magic shows. It's quite common. Would rely on this.
Don't they also throw in that you announce it?
So it is quoted in the name of Elashiv that that the magician has to show the audience how one of the tricks is done, so that everybody knows that it's so that everybody knows it's the trick, but not everybody requires it. רבי חנניה בן עקשיא אומר הקדוש ברוך הוא לזכות ישראל לפי מתפלל תורה מצוות שנאמר דבר חפץ למען צדקו יגדיל תורה ויהדות. אמן. ויהי ישמעאל ברוך